Nope. Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Joel News Hour. I really appreciate it. Oh my goodness, that I always laugh. That bit of hair right there always. Anyway, um, is always sticking out. It's a weird thing that my hairline is doing. I'm looking like a vampire. Um, and I knocked over the camera this weekend, so everything's all out of all out of kilter. There we go. Um, it's and every time I knock it over, I have to replace it and everything, and it was anyway. Welcome to the Cameron Journal News Hour. My name is Cameron Cowan. A couple housekeeping things. If you've not signed up for Cameron Journal Plus to support this show and my journalism, make sure to head over to CameronJournal.com/subscribe and sign up there. Also, the newsletter comes out every Saturday, and there's usually a midweek check-in as well. So make sure to check that out, cameronjoel.com/newsletter. That's the best way to find everything. The Saturday newsletter is fun because I do the news, I do an update from me, I do an interesting video of the week, and you get the interview and the news hour sent directly to you. So it's the best thing um, ever. It's a lot of fun. We have fun here. And so make sure to sign up for that. It's a great way to keep up on the headlines and the stories that I am following, which is always fun. Um, if you're one of my business subscribers and you want exclusive LinkedIn content, make sure to sign up on LinkedIn for the newsletter. I'm working on my 2025 halfway point trends report. It's basically done. I just got to publish it. It's been a long day. Got to publish it and everything. So, that's fun as well. As I do want to mention a very special thing that's going to happen on Wednesday. So right now I stream just this one day a week for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. This I'm considering adding a second day of streaming to the schedule, but we're gonna go in a very different direction. Um, so what I'm planning on doing is doing a panel show, a kind of a group talk show with a couple of buddies of mine. And we're gonna do the pilot on Wednesday at 4 p.m. It's gonna be called tentatively the Living Joke podcast, but we're gonna do a pilot this Wednesday at 4 o'clock. So if you are wanting to come along and listen to gaming, pop culture, video reactions, very different from this. We're gonna have some fun. Um, Three very different perspectives. We're gonna hear the quiet one talk, which is always exciting. And it's just gonna be a lot of fun. And it's meant to be more fun, more morning zoo. Not as maybe necessarily highbrow and intellectual and depressing as my content can sometimes be because we're talking about important issues and everything. But it's gonna be a lot of fun. They're gonna bring a whole new energy. It's gonna be less about me, more about them in the group and everything. So that's this coming Wednesday at 4 p.m. So tell your friends, spread it around. The events are already out. If you're watching this, there's already a planned event on your channel, on YouTube, on Twitch, on Facebook. So just make sure you have notifications on for all those platforms for when we go live. It's going to be tons of fun. The other cool thing is they are both gaming streamers, and they stream all kinds of games. So there's gonna be a chance to follow along and watch their streams and chat them up as time goes on too, which is really cool. So looking forward to that. Launching new things. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun, very interesting, and we're going to go from there. So that's housekeeping, that's events, that's everything going on in the Cameron Journal universe. I'm still adjusting to fitting my written content into a more newslettery format than it has been in the past with doing articles primarily for Google and all that type of thing. So It's good. But we're gonna dive into the headlines now because it's been a long day. I'm kind of already ready to be done with this day. That's the one advantage of doing this show in the evening. Where I'm kind of already done with the day, but we have very important things happening, so we're gonna talk about it. So let me do this, and here we go. And we're not gonna start with that. That's a fun story to end on. So, we're gonna start with Israel and Iran. So let's catch everybody up. If for some reason you don't know, let's catch everybody up on the Israel-Iran situation. So, let me put on my glasses so I can hear something. So, so as we know, Israel and Iran have been trading blows, including up until today. And on Saturday, the U.S. bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. And then we also, which there's actually the video here of the B-2 bomber landing back in Missouri. And then this here we have about Trump's imminent ceasefire, and we have Iranian missiles trying to get to reach U.S. air bases in Qatar today, and the Qatari air defenses were shooting them down. The airspace over the area was shut down. Iran's threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz. There's a lot going on. So let's read a little bit, and then I'll kind of fill you in on where I think this is all going. So, Israel fired a new round of strikes at Tehran and other Iranian cities early on Monday, and the Israeli military said it had identified missiles launched from Iran hours after President Trump raised the prospect of regime change in the Islamic Republic. The new attacks came a day after U.S. bombers and submarines unleashed heavy strikes on a trio of Iranian nuclear facilities, and as the state of Tehran's nuclear program remained unclear, top U.S. officials said it was too soon to say whether Iran still retained the ability to make a nuclear weapon, and the location of its existing stockpile of enriched uranium was unknown, even as Mr. Trump doubled down on his claim that Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities had been obliterated. Residents in Iran said they could see and hear heavy strikes in central Tehran early Monday. Strikes were also heard in Tabriz, a city in the northwest. In Israel, sirens sounded across several areas of the central part of the country, but the military later announced the residents were safe to leave protected spaces. The U.S. strikes on Sunday stoked fears of a dangerously escalating conflict across the Middle East and urgent calls from world leaders for diplomacy. But after officials in his administration emphasized that the United States did not want an all-out war with Iran, Mr. Trump suggested on social media that a change in Iran's government was not unthinkable. Quote, "If the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change?" Mr. Trump wrote on Truth Social. He later said satellite imagery showed that nuclear sites had suffered monumental damage in the U.S. attacks. Quote, "Obliteration is an accurate term," unquote, he wrote on Truth Social. "The most significant damage took place, quote, far below ground level," unquote, he added. It was a possible reference to Fordo, the deepest of the three sites that were attacked, although it was unclear which one Mr. Trump was referring to. Pentagon officials have struck a more cautious tone, describing the damage to three sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan as severe. Senior officials have also conceded they did not know the whereabouts of Iran's supply of near-bomb-grade uranium. Rafael Mariano Grossi, the director of International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's nuclear watchdog, said he believed that the stockpile, which is stored in special casks small enough to fit in the trunks of about 10 cars, had been moved. There were also evidence, according to two Israeli officials with knowledge of the intelligence, that Iran had moved equipment and uranium from the site in recent days. Iranian officials castigated the United States for the strikes, with the country's foreign minister, Abbas Aragachi, saying at a news conference in Istanbul that Iran, quote, "reserves all options to defend its security interests and people," unquote. He declined to be more specific, including about whether Iran would retaliate against U.S. military assets in the Middle East, where more than 40,000 American military personnel and civilians are on bases and warships, which we know they eventually did today. That Iran launched missiles at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which is actually the video of these missiles flying through, which could be seen from Doha. And however, it was a rather considered response, as the Iranians called the Americans ahead of time to let them know what was going to happen. So, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for diplomacy at an emergency meeting of the Security Council, saying that the world now risks, quote, descending into a rat hole of retaliation after retaliation. American military and intelligence officials had already detected signs that Iran-backed militias were preparing to attack U.S. bases in Iraq and possibly Syria. In response, Iraqi officials were working hard to dissuade militia action, a U.S. official said on Sunday. We have a possible response, the strikes, the mood in Iran. Many Iranians expressed a combination of sorrow and anger. We're all in shock. None of us expected that within 6 or 7 days we'd reach this point, one Iranian said. Oil prices rose moderately as the market opened on Sunday evening, a sign that traders were concerned, though not panicked, about how Iran may respond to the U.S. bombing. Um, and then it has a series of updates of where the attacks were. So, Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo. There was really attacks in Tehran and Tabriz. So that's kind of, if you're not familiar with the geography of Iran, and who is, then you've got a nice visual here of where these things were taking place. So, yeah, this down here is the Strait of Hormuz, for those that don't know. So, in the oil trade, the ships come up this way, they kind of curve around here, and then they're usually leaving that direction. They come up here to fill up and then leave in the same way. So you have inbound and outbound traffic. And you have a lot of, because it's Saudi Arabia, you have a lot of pipelines that end here, and roads and highways and things. Um, so that's so if you're wondering about that, the Strait of Hormuz thing, that's where that is. And here's the update on that. As Iran mulls closing the Strait of Hormuz, India has increasingly been buying oil from diverse sources to reduce its dependence on the Middle East. India, one of the world's largest importers, buys cheap oil from Russia to the displeasure of Europe and the United States, and they are buying more energy from the U.S. Quote, a large volume of our supplies do not come to the Strait of Hormuz now, Hardeep Singh Puri, India's Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas, said. And there's all these different world leaders, complaining about it. Oil tumbles and stock climbs as traders gauge fallout from Iran strikes. The price was actually down right now. The Iranian parliament did vote to close the Strait of Hormuz, but I don't know if everyone's actually going to do that, and if they're going to do it with what. What ships do they have? There's already our ships in the region. Not quite sure how all that's going to work. So that's kind of where things are right now. There is this whole, okay, so then there's the ceasefire situation. So, in the middle of my preparing for this and having these stories on tap, and now that we know kind of what happened, Israel and Iran have been trading strikes. We bombed their nuclear sites. Israel is still continuing to bomb Tehran, and Iran sent missiles at U.S. military installations today in Qatar with warning that it was going to happen. All the major equipment was removed from those bases last week, and there's been no report of any death of personnel. So, that's kind of where we're at with everything. Now, this came up right as I was getting ready to go on the air. It says here, congratulations to everyone. It's been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire in approximately 6 hours from now. So this would be midnight tonight Eastern, when Israel and Iran have wound down and completed their in-progress final missions, for 12 hours, at which point the war will be considered ended. Officially, Iran will start the ceasefire, and upon the 12th hour, Israel will start the ceasefire, and upon the 24th hour, an official end to the 12-day war will be saluted by the world. During each ceasefire, the other side will remain peaceful and respectful. On the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will, I would like to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage, and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war. This is a war that could have gone on for years and destroyed the entire Middle East, but it didn't and never will. God bless Israel, God bless Iran, God bless the Middle East, God bless the United States of America, and God bless the world. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. And of course, the comments down here are fun, but this the reason I clicked on this was because there was a trend on Twitter saying trust in Trump, and I'm kind of like, okay, is that the new right-wing narrative? As it turns out, it is. And it's because of this whole ceasefire thing. Here's the funny part, and if we scroll to the top, Trump says ceasefire is imminent. No word from Iran or Israel on the aforementioned ceasefire. And this gets into, Vice President J.D. Vance said the war appeared to be effectively over, and there was now an opportunity to restart a real peace process. And then they go through the Trump tweet we just read, and not quite sure if Iran's going to go any further with its response. And it said, the new Israeli barrage, which a military spokesman said targeted a paramilitary headquarters and access routes to the Fordo nuclear enrichment site that the U.S. military bombarded, came as Iran fired salvos of missiles that sent Israelis to huddle in shelters as Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi met with the key ally, President Vladimir Putin of Russia. While the Russian leader called the U.S. strikes absolutely unprovoked aggression, he stopped short of offering concrete support for Iran. So that's kind of where things are at this hour. President Trump is saying there's going to be a ceasefire. There's no indication there's going to actually be a ceasefire, from Iran and Israel anyway, and they're the ones that have to do the ceasefiring. And then we have a lot of action going on. So, to quote my friend on TikTok, that Intel guy, who's a wonderful person, and he's been on the show, is it World War III yet? No! Oh my goodness, everyone is convinced, and I don't understand where this narrative comes from. For some reason that I will never understand, everyone wants to have World War III. Everyone wants to just stick a dynamite in the whole world, push the plunger, blow the whole thing up, and have that be it. I will never understand this. We have a good thing going here, folks. I like I like modern civilization. It's a good thing. Everyone's in the mood to blow everything up. World wars start when great powers want to go to war. Let's quickly review history. Who were the great powers going to war in World War I? That would be Britain, France, Italy, Imperial Russia, the Austro-Hungarians, and the Germans. All great empires, all great powers. Let's look at World War II. Britain, France, Germany, Italy later, sort of, communist Russia by this time, and the United States. And the United States later in World War I as well. And Japan in World War II. And Japan also in World War I, but they didn't contribute much. So these you have to have the ability to project power, to move lots of troops, all this type of thing. Israel doesn't have the capability to do that. Iran certainly doesn't. They're surrounded by mountains on three sides. If anything, the only great power involved in this thing is the United States, because we chose to bomb some nuclear sites that may or may not have been effective, which we don't really know. Because you can't really tell by satellite, because these were bunker buster bombs that dig down first and then explode. There's no, that we're not having a World War III situation. It's not like Iran has a series of great power alliances, and when you shoot somebody in Iran, nations go to war. That's not this situation. Iran's best ally is Russia, and we just read about how Putin says, yeah, the strikes were bad, but is not giving full-throated support. So no, it's not World War III. Here's the big difference about conflict then versus conflict now, and it's how much we're conscious of it. In another day and time, you would not be hearing this news from me. A very nice man on a major TV network wearing a suit and not a lovely t-shirt, although this is designer, would be on a suit in a studio with very serious people, and he would be sitting very soberly and telling you about the latest sort of thing. The whole thing would last a half hour, and we would go on with our lives. Instead, now, we have a constant feed of people talking about it, like myself, chatter, chatter, chatter. We have social media to let us know, the minute any bit of information comes out, with video, in glorious technicolor. All our consciousness of these things makes the world seem so much worse, and these things so much bigger than they actually really are in the grand scheme of things. And it can be depressing, it can be mental health destroying. I get all of that, I understand all of that, sure. But the reality is, this is not the stuff that adds up to anywhere near close World War III. Not even in the neighborhood. Not even close. I promise you. There are vectors for that sort of thing starting, but the reality is you would need at least the United States and China to decide to want to do something. Speaking of that, in the newsletter on Saturday, I wrote that two of the three conflicts that I thought we would live to see in the future and could cause global instability, two of them have occurred. One of them was Russia invading Ukraine, which we all kind of knew would maybe happen one day. It hasn't gone very well, but it happened. The other one is Israel striking against Iran. Now, I always thought it would be Israel striking Iranian nuclear sites. As it turns out, they don't have the capability to do that like we do. So they've hired us to do it. And the the swore we're gonna get to narratives and how this is all going on with MAGA in a minute. Um, but hint hint, not good. But this is the second conflict. The third one being the U.S. and China over Taiwan. So we're two best two out of three on these things. But this is the world, as I wrote in the newsletter, that we're living in the world of Samuel Huntington, where there's going to be lots of low-level conflicts happening all the time. And we could do even more. We could do what happened with India and Pakistan. We can talk about Turkey and their actions in Syria with the Kurds. We can talk about what's happening in South Sudan, terrible famine, sort of thing. We can talk about all sorts of low-level, sort of simmering, festering conflicts happening all over the world. This is the world Samuel Huntington said we would be living in, especially when we're living in an age when the U.S. is, not that you could tell from this story, is stepping back from a global role, keeping a lid on everything. Um, that gives a space for more of these small conflicts to begin to occur. Here's the reality. Israel has been itching to go up against Iran for a long time. Iran backing Hamas in the last couple of years in their latest occupation war / genocide of Palestinians and their war against Hamas. Has given them the excuse to start this second vector. They've expanded into Lebanon as part of Greater Israel, all this sort of thing. And so you have this, you have these openings, you have these opportunities for people to do stuff. And it's very important to be mindful of that aspect of geopolitics. We are not living in an age where we're going to be free of small conflicts and everything's kept a lid on. That time has passed. So I would encourage people that just because you've seen something on social media or a new headline or whatever is not, just another, it is, when people say it's just another thing, that's your consumption of social media. It's not reflective of the world's going to hell in a handbasket. It just isn't. It's a very we're in a very different time. I think what throws people off is, it's not so much during the Cold War, but especially in a post-Cold War environment, the world was very quiet and stable for a very long time. And even in the Cold War did a really good job of keeping a lid on a lot of conflicts. And one of the reasons Huntington said we were going to get into a world where we were going to have small conflicts is he realized a lot of this stuff had been suppressed for decades. And we're now finally living in that place of these small conflicts happening all the time and a general kind of mood of violence happening around the planet. Honestly, historically, the 20th century was a bit of an aberration. Someone going to war with someone somewhere is been the default mode of most of human history. If anything, we're regressing back to the mean. We're getting back to how things are and were. Now, the big difference these days is that we have intercontinental ballistic missiles. We have weapons that are very powerful and can go a very long way, and so war is conducted very differently than gathering a gaggle of troops together and marching off to some land. And obviously with the nuclear threat and not only the power and destruction of that explosion, but the radiation and the effect of lives is even more pronounced. The propensity of paramilitary organizations and terrorist organizations to be able to attack kind of anywhere, anytime, unless you keep very close track of them, is different as well. Those are real things that we have to handle in our modern age. But the reality is this sort of low-level violence around the planet is actually incredibly normal. Weirdly enough. And I know that sounds strange, but weirdly enough, that is the way it is. Now, the other thing I want to turn to, and perhaps this is the story to transition into about it, is kind of how MAGA is, taking all of this. So one of the aspects of this present conflict and whether the U.S. was going to join Israel or not, which was last week's discussion, and whether we were going to bomb nuclear sites, which we did, and all this type of thing, was the number of MAGA people who said, I voted for Trump for no new wars, and now we're starting another war. We're getting involved again. And that he ran on a certain amount of American isolationism. And it's hard to see a much isolationism these days, especially when it comes to the Israel-Iran conflict. And it even, people would be shocked to find out we haven't really necessarily really pulled back on supporting Ukraine either. They're still in it to win it, and they're producing results, and really, their last drone attack was devastating. And so I think a lot of men are waking up to the fact that, running on isolationism and actually implementing isolationism are two very different things. They are uh, they're very isolationism is not an easy thing to do. And we did this 100 years ago. After World War I, people were like, no more crazy European wars. We are done. No, thank you. And it's one of the reasons we didn't join the League of Nations. There was too much political pushback. And through the 20s into the 30s, we were very isolationist, high trade barriers, all this type of thing. Does any of this sound familiar? Um, and even in the lead up to World War II, when Hitler invades Poland in 1939, people immediately began protesting, like, do not get involved. Like, we do not want to do this again. And the only reason that that shifted was because of Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. And even then, um, it was still people were protesting. And one of the things we never talk about in World War II are conscientious objectors, and the amount of people that refused to be drafted, refused to go in, were not in the mood for another protracted foreign conflict. Fast forward another 90 years, and we're back to that same isolationist place, and MAGA is kind of melting down about that and feeling they're being dragged into yet another protracted Middle East conflict when they voted for isolationism and they voted for this to not be a problem. And also people, feeling like, when Israel calls, the U.S. answers kind of no matter what. And I think for a lot of younger people, I noticed both on the left and on the right are unhappy about that in the kind of the dialogue that has been going on, the discourse that's been happening. And I will write more about that. But I want to transition to this post from James Kirkpatrick to talking about MAGA and how they're taking this whole involvement in Iran, which a lot of them vehemently go against. And I thought it was interesting that, obviously one never has to look that far to find, I would say, politically unsavory opinions on Twitter, especially these days. But I thought this one was rather interesting because it ties into, I think, the frustration MAGA feels over Israel and Iran right now. And it says here, if MAGA fails, we basically end up back where the white right was in 2013. Post-Americanism, white identitarianism, and a million different harebrained political schemes as demographics make national electoral politics pointless. Except now we won't have free speech either. And then he says, if that's what it is, that's what it is, but let's not kid ourselves, it'll be easy. Um, and I think this idea of the MAGA movement as the big, um, I would say, the big kind of overarching way to save the country. This was a quote tweet of a tweet about American identity that says, American identity has been almost completely destroyed in the last 25 years, and I don't have a clue how to bring it back. It's been done through a combination of mass immigration and indoctrinating people into hating their own. We could address so much. Let's focus on MAGA. And this idea that the only way to save the country, the only way to stop what is happening, has happened, all this sort of thing, is to take over everything. There's people who talk about, oh, we need, Republican, super majorities in both houses. We've got to lock the Democrats out of power. I was reading a tweet earlier today about, a Jewish man who didn't feel safe because of what he sees as rising anti-Semitism, particularly in the Democratic Party, which I would caution him to look at what's happening on the right, which I think is far worse, but whatever. Democrats are saying, oh, we don't like Israel doing a genocide, and that somehow makes them anti-Semitic, which is not the thing. And I've said that many times before. Criticizing the government of Israel for its policies does not make one anti-Semitic. Jews are lovely people. Jews happen to be in the government of Israel. It's the government of Israel I have issue with. There are also non-Jews in the government of Israel, so that too. Anyway, this whole narrative that the thing about this situation is people were inviting him to join the Republican Party, and I find it interesting that we've come to such a fractious place in this country. MAGA complaints about America have little to do with policy. They have a lot to do with culture, national mood, like this one, American identity, and the in their zeal to save the country, they're looking at what they view are the problems, which are immigrants, one could argue poor people, one could argue, it's DEI, it's woke, it's all of these things. It's, I think a lot of the MAGA movement is, and I wrote about this 10 years ago, are looking at the way the country's changing. Demographically, we're becoming browner and less white. We're more multicultural than we were before. And we're, transitioning into more of a multicultural democracy. Are looking at the world outside and saying, in order to save the country we want to live in, we have to, get rid of all these sort of people. And this ties into my essay, The Death of the White Heteronormative Christian Narrative. Before something ends, there's usually an extinction burst. MAGA is that extinction burst. The movement's bigger than Trump now. It will last longer than Trump. And the reality of that movement is they are trying to hang on to a country that, quite honestly, no longer exists. Now, there were a lot of things about that country that I think were quite laudable. I think there were a lot of things about that country that were quite good. One of the things we did in the 2010s was we did something very dangerous to do to a population of people. And we took the American narrative, the American mythology, that had, quite frankly, was mostly written by the CIA in the 1950s to counter communism, but whatever. And we started to take it apart. We exposed it for what maybe wasn't quite true, didn't really exist, wasn't quite there. The lies and things that we told ourselves underneath everything that we thought we knew about this country, to talk about its racist systems, to talk about how it's disadvantaged people of color, women, all that for so long, and how the promise of America went unfulfilled for so many, for so long, and was the past really that great? And great for who? Not if you were poor, not if you were a woman, not if you were of color, all these things kind of, pile up. And we had a big discussion about that from about 2012, 2013, even one could argue 2010, forward to, one could argue, 2024. And I think that MAGA looks at that, and the sort of highly filtered, what kind of made it down to the popular consciousness of what those discussions were, like the 1619 Project and all this sort of thing, all these new policies and new ideas, and and how people of color is seeping into the culture, and gay people are seeping into the culture, and all of a sudden the Democratic Party is staking its claim on the rights of minorities and people who are a small percentage of the population, and this is where this political conflict begins. Is you have one party that wants to move forward into that multiracial democracy, and one party who says, we're not going to have a country. And the thing about MAGA is they're not wrong. That's the funny part. Well, not necessarily funny, true. What they feel like they're losing is that myth, that mythology, the country they thought they had. And they would like to, as best as they can, run back inside the cave with the mythology, with the story, with the idea, and never have to confront and deal with the unsavory parts of it. The parts of it that are difficult. The parts of it that are hard. The parts of it that that are not necessarily so great or so laudable. Decisions that were made. The genocide of Native Americans and throughout our country, the transatlantic slave trade, the disadvantages of women, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the way we've treated immigrants off and on, depending on how many of them there were at any given moment. Irish need not apply. All of these things are part of the American story. But in the 50s, the CIA wrote an American story that was simple, it was palatable, and it was made to counter communism. And unfortunately, it became part of the fabric. It became part of the entire conversation, and to some degree, it became the entire conversation. And unfortunately, now we have a movement that seeks to hang on to something that never actually existed, but they're trying to hang on to the the world and the point of view that sprang from that, with and basically saying we're not going to be critical of ourselves, we're not going to introspect, we're going to keep with our mythology because it was good and it worked and we liked it. And that's a really hard place to be in as a country, because much like the American Civil War, not that I think we're headed towards a violent civil war, although weirdly one of my new Gen Z employees from South America asked me that last week. He's a wonderful new contractor with us. Asked if it was going to be a civil war. Because last week we were talking about National Guard troops in Los Angeles and all that sort of thing. That's how fast the news moves around here. I'm not thinking we're headed for a civil war, but I do think we are having, to quote former President Biden, a war for the soul of America. We are trying to find what it means to be an American. What is the new identity? How can, I think one side of the country is trying to embrace all of America in the mess and the people who've been advantaged, disadvantaged, all this type of thing. And I think one side of the country is saying, no, we don't need that. Our America doesn't include that. We don't have any desire to deal with any of that stuff. And if you do, you're wrong, you're bad, you're woke, you're DEI, you're destroying the country. I don't know what the outcome of this will be. Time will tell. But it's a very interesting place to be in this country. And that kind of brings us all the way back around to this tweet. And then we're going to move on. That, one, I think it's interesting, he defines right as particularly white. But also this idea that if MAGA does not kind of purge, any idea of multiculturalism from this country, that we're going to end up in this terrible different, this terrible place with, post-Americanism and, and having, whites with their own identity, white identitarianism, and all this type of thing. And, and we're going to lack free speech because of, social media and Palantir and all this type of thing. And I think it's a very interesting thing of, they see the outcome as, if they do not win this, they're going to be stuck in a country full of brown people. And for people like James Kilpatrick or whoever runs this account, that's a fate worse than death. And I think that's where we truly are as a country, politically. It's, who gets to stay, who's going to go, how is this all going to work? And I think it's endlessly fascinating, and frightening at moments, to be in a time, in a country where we're trying to deal with these issues. In November, when the election went through, and I was very frightened, and I think some people now think I'm maybe not necessarily frightened enough, and some people think it's time to leave, and I've had friends ask me if I was planning on leaving and all this type of thing, and I'm like, well, no, I can't afford to, and don't know how I'd, make money there, whatever have you. But this is the type of thing where things could get very difficult very quickly, and could get violent very quickly, as we've seen recently with some of the political assassinations, and like we were talking about last week with the Minnesota House representatives that were, shot, and one of them died, and her husband, and one of them has still survived, and all this sort of thing. It can get very dangerous, and this sort of dynamic was what we were all afraid of, was that, with this sort of, in 2020 we felt like we'd escaped the Trump situation. And in 2024, a lot of us felt like we were being drugged back in, to all of this. And really the reality is that the tough political stuff we're dealing with, and I think this is also kind of why Democrats are struggling, is Democrats are looking at this from a policy angle. That's what the Biden administration did. Oh, we'll get more union jobs going, we'll build the economy, we'll add 200,000 manufacturing jobs. That's not the mood right now. The mood is cultural, who's outside, how we're living, who gets to live here, what does it mean to be an American. That's the stuff, right? That's where MAGA is. And the unfortunate reality is it's very easy to get people afraid of a changing country and a changing world. It is frightening, and people can play into that, and Trump has done. And MAGA feels like if they don't win, if they don't successfully rout us all and drive us as many people out as they can and lock the Democrats out of power forever, then it's going to be over for, white people or the white right, or it's going to be all over. And that's I think the mood where this tweet comes from. And that's a very dangerous place to be as a country. Because then the next question is, how far are they willing to go? And how many of us will be arrested, deported for speaking out? How many of us will be imprisoned to preserve the country that they're trying to rebuild? To get back to a place where white is right, it's the white people that live here, and the rest of us, if we're allowed to live here, are merely honored guests in their home, but not fully American, not fully a part of the society, and we certainly should demand nothing from the society that we are not kindly given. And nothing strikes me as old-fashioned paternalism than that idea. And I think the voices from it are growing louder, and it's a little bit frightening when there's people in government who are online a part of these discussions and start spouting the talking points and all this type of thing. It is very frightening. I don't blame anyone for leaving. I may look back on this time and a year from now and be like, oh my god, I should have just found the money and, sold my car and gotten the hell out, and whatever have you. And it's just like, yeah, but it's very unfortunate. Anyway, that went on longer than I was planning on, but this tweet just grabbed me so hard, and I realized, oh yeah, this is the hub on which it's all turning. And it was also a good time to mention the death of the white heteronormative Christian narrative again, because I actually wrote that in 2014. I saw this coming a while ago, and lo and behold, it's here. I think the scariest part for me is I thought this would happen a few decades later, and it's happening now. Ahead of the schedule I had in my head, and that's a very interesting place to be in. Speaking of deport them all, which right now everyone's like, let's get back to the deportations. This story streamed in. The Trump administration live updates. The Supreme Court allows Trump to deport migrants to third countries. It says here, the Supreme Court on Monday allowed the Trump administration to deport migrants to countries other than their own, pausing a federal judge's ruling that they must first be given a chance to show they would face a risk of torture there. The pause allows the administration to send men held at an American military base in Djibouti onto South Sudan while their court case plays out. The court's 3 liberal members dissented. Florida is turning an abandoned airport in the Everglades into the newest and scariest sounding local prison to detain migrants. The remote facility, nicknamed Alligator Alcatraz, will cost the state around $450 million a year to run, but Florida can request some reimbursement from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which, if we remember last week, Trump is shutting down. Oh. It says here that the order was the latest in a series of rulings related to immigration decided by the justices in summary fashion on what critics call the court's shadow docket, to allow the administration to lift protections for hundreds of thousands of people who've been granted temporary protected status or humanitarian parole. That'd be the Haitians. But others, and many Venezuelans too, but others insisted on due process, notice, and an opportunity to be heard for migrants before they are deported. Monday's ruling moved in a different direction, refusing to allow migrants to make the case that they would face torture if sent to places with which they have no connection. The absence of any reasoning made it impossible to understand the majority's thinking, but in dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, joined by Justices Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson, said the majority had ignored a federal law that requires due process. Quote, Congress expressly provided non-citizens with the right not to be removed to a country where they are likely to be tortured or killed, Justice Sotomayor wrote, adding that the Supreme Court has long held that people must be given a chance to explain why they should not face grievous loss. Quote, being deprived of the right to not be deported to a country likely to torture or kill you plainly counts, quote, unquote, such as a loss, she added. Thus, plaintiffs have a right to be heard. Justice Sotomayor wrote that the majority had endorsed lawlessness. Quote, the government has made clear in word and in deed that it feels itself unconstrained by law, free to deport anyone, anywhere without notice or an opportunity to be heard, unquote, she wrote. Lee Cowan, a lawyer with the Northwest Immigration Rights Project, which represents migrants in the case, said the court's order would have devastating consequences. Quote, the Supreme Court's ruling leaves thousands of people vulnerable to deportation to third countries where they face torture or death, even if the deportations are clearly unlawful, she said. This case arose from a trial judge's order that applies to migrants cleared for removal from the United States whom the administration seeks to deport to third countries, ones where they do not hold citizenship and where they may have no connection. The judge said such migrants were entitled to due process, meaning notice of where they were going and the chance to argue that they were at risk of harm if sent there. Though the judge's order applied to many migrants, it captured public attention in May when the government loaded 8 men onto a plane said to be headed to South Sudan, a violence-plagued African country that most of them had never set foot in. Their flight landed instead in the East African nation of Djibouti, where there is an American military base, and they have been held there ever since. The judge, Brian E. Murphy of the U.S. District Court in Boston, ruled that the men must be given access to lawyers and a chance to challenge the government's plan to send them to South Sudan. There were 8 deportees aboard the flight to Djibouti, 1 is South Sudanese, and the government has said that another will be sent to Myanmar, his home country, leaving the 6 others in limbo. All 8 have been convicted of violent crimes. And then it goes on about the men and everything, and we know about their case. So, I thought that was rather interesting and fascinating. That now, if you are a migrant and they deport you, we can just send you any old where, which also means they can send more people to El Salvador as well. They can send you anywhere, a plane's going to, Nepal. Oh, there you go. Bye. It's like they'll love you in Nepal, sort of thing. And I have no problem with deporting illegal immigrants. I have no problem with deporting migrants who have committed crimes. All fine and well. There should be a due process for it, and they should at least be sent to their proper country of origin. This is ridiculous. It's to just be able to send people any old where, you could be sentencing people to something quite terrible and not know, and then you wouldn't care, and it's whatever. And so, that's a real, that's a step backwards. The other story I want to do, so this is good. A white nationalist wrote a law school paper about promoting racist views. It won him an award. The University of Florida student won an academic honor after he argued in a paper that the Constitution only applies to white people. From there, the situation spiraled. Preston Damsky is a law student at the University of Florida. He is also a white nationalist and anti-Semite. Last fall, he took a seminar taught by a federal judge on originalism, the legal theory favored by many conservatives that seeks to interpret the Constitution based on its meaning when it was adopted. In his capstone paper for the class, Mr. Damsky argued that the framers had intended for the phrase, "we the people," in the Constitution's preamble to refer exclusively to white people. From there, he argued for the removal of voting rights protections for non-whites and for the issuance of shoot-to-kill orders against, quote, criminal infiltrators at the border, unquote. Turning over the country to a, quote, non-white majority, unquote, Mr. Damsky wrote, would constitute a, quote, terrible crime, unquote. White people, he warned, quote, cannot be expected to meekly swallow this demographic assault on their sovereignty, unquote. What was I just saying 10 minutes ago? At the end of the semester, Mr. Damsky, 29, was given the, quote, book award, unquote, which designated him as the best student in the class. According to the syllabus, the capstone counted the most toward final grades. The Trump-nominated judge who taught the class, John L. Badalamenti, declined to comment for this article and does not appear to have publicly discussed why he chose Mr. Damsky for the award. That left some students and faculty members at the law school, considered Florida's most prestigious, to wonder and to worry. What merit could the judge have seen in it? The granting of the award set off months of turmoil on the law school campus. Its interim dean, Merrick McAllister, defended the decision earlier this year, citing Mr. Damsky's free speech rights and arguing that the professors must not engage in viewpoint discrimination. Ms. McAllister, in an email to the law school community, also invoked, quote, institutional neutrality, unquote, an increasingly popular policy among college administrators. It instructs schools not to take public positions on hot-button issues. But the question of how officials should respond to Mr. Damsky, who in an interview said that referring to him as a Nazi, quote, would not be manifestly wrong, unquote, is not merely academic. Well beyond the classroom, bigoted and extremist views are on the rise and vying for mainstream acceptance, raising questions about whether principles of neutrality and free speech rights are proper and adequate responses to the threats. X, the social media platform owned by Elon Musk, recently allowed millions of people to view Kanye West's new song, saluting Hitler, when other platforms removed it. Vice President J.D. Vance criticized European governments' efforts to ostracize far-right political parties on the grounds that doing so violates the principles of free speech. At the University of Florida, the story of the book award took a dramatic turn soon after Ms. McAllister defended the decision to honor Mr. Dembski with it. It was then in February that Mr. Dembski opened an account on X and began posting racist and anti-Semitic messages. After he wrote in late March that Jews must, quote, be abolished by any means necessary, unquote, again, and it's the Democrats who are anti Semitic. The university suspended him, barred him from campus, and stepped up police patrols around the law school. He is now challenging the punishment which could result in his expulsion. Mr. Dembski's hateful post drew shock and fear in some quarters of the university. According to the Hillel International, the university has the largest number of Jewish undergraduate students in the country. Its student body is 48% white, 22% Hispanic, 10% Asian, 5% black, according to school data. A spokesman for the university declined to answer questions related to this article or to make any administrators available for interviews, but in emails to Mr. Dembski obtained by the New York Times, university officials wrote that his post had made numerous students fear for their safety. The officials also said another student's claim that Mr. Dembski had described his paper as concluding, quote, on a call for extra-legal violence, unquote, which Mr. Dembski denies. And then it goes into reactions and people arguing against the award and why it should never be given out, and it emboldened him to make those posts, and why, if it's a good paper on the merits and the arguments are made well, should it not, win an award if it's the best one, sort of thing. And that's if you want to get more into it, please go read the article. But when I saw it, I was, as someone who's spent a lot of time studying white nationalism, and as someone who's written about some of the most racist people in the country, and as someone who spent a lot of time in that world, studying that world, looking at that world, all that type of thing, I really, I was really beguiled by it. And for me, it's really hard because I'm a firm believer in universities must be open places for all types of thought, even thought we don't like. And I am very close to a free speech absolutist. And this presents a very interesting conundrum for your friend Cameron. Because on the one hand, he should have the right to write this and to argue it well and cite his sources and all that type of thing. And on the other hand, I do think, we hit the tolerance paradox in terms of you lose the tolerant society if you tolerate intolerance. And, the reality of this situation is that, he probably was emboldened a little bit by this to open an X account and join in on the racist posting. And he probably did, feel that it was, a certain amount of sort of an endorsement of it. Not necessarily his ideas, but his ability to argue them. And I think it's interesting. I kind of wish I could read the paper. But I also understand, how it, not just, it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's even okay to be offended. But when it comes to personal safety, I understand that argument too. And that's, I think that's part of, typically in years past, even when I was in college, and that was a long time ago, there were certain topics that were kind of no-go zones. There were certain lines of inquiry that you did not go down, and your professors and your faculty and your administration would not support you in doing it. And it was kind of for the reason we're talking about this story. And I kind of laugh because a lot of the stuff he talks about is stuff that I was talking about our discussion about MAGA and everything else. And this is where, I think having certain standards on certain issues is important. I think if he hadn't been given the award for best paper, this probably wouldn't be a story. But the reality is when you give students awards for papers, it's a tacit endorsement of something, sort of thing. And again, as it kind of expanded and became a scandal and he, gets barred and banned from campus and all this sort of thing, this is something where if you're going to do this and you're going to go there, you have to be extremely careful with how you do it, extremely polite with how you do it, and you should not expect what amounts to an endorsement from your professor about it, especially when it is a very contentious issue and you're talking about real people, and notice, again, they always talk about the Democrats are anti-Semitic, but then there's this guy, originalist and getting rid of Jews and all that type of thing. It's like, I wouldn't be afraid of Democrats winning. I'd be much more afraid of people like this winning. And as we spoke before, this is becoming a mainstream thing. Like, this is, even those comments on that tweet was, oh yeah, if we, we have to have Nazism to counter Bolshevism and all this. I mean, I've watched this sort of thing go from extremely fringe to borderline mainstream. And that's very frightening, if I guess, unless you're white. And so that yeah, it's at a very interesting intersection of free speech, free thought, and protecting a tolerant society. And there's no easy answer. Um, I I guess my only answer would be, yeah, you can write your paper. It better be argued very well, but I'm not giving you any awards for it. Um, and actually, towards the bottom, they actually kind of address that. Um, and the actually talks about some at the law school agree with her stance. In an interview, John F. Stiniford, a professor at the university, said it would be academic misconduct for a law professor who opposed abortion to give a lower grade to a well-argued paper advocating for abortion rights. If it were a good paper, he said, you should put aside your moral qualms and give it an A. A number of students disagree, but several declined to be interviewed on the record for fear of criticizing the school or a sitting federal judge would harm their future job prospects. One former student who graduated in May had his post-graduation job offer rescinded by a large law firm when he told them he'd spoken to the New York Times for this article, criticizing Mr. Damsky's paper and Judge Bondalamenti for granting him the award. The student asked not to be identified for fear of jeopardizing other job offers. Before his suspension, Mr. Damsky had been offered a summer internship in the local prosecutor's office, but in early April, the prosecutor, Brian Kramer, and the state attorney for the 8th Judicial Circuit of Florida rescinded the offer. You could imagine, Mr. Kramer said in an interview, that, quote, having someone in your office who espouses those kinds of beliefs would cause significant mistrust in the fairness of prosecutions, unquote. And for our final story, we're going to dive into dating for a little bit. So, over the weekend, the New York Times posted this news story, Men, Where Have You Gone? Please Come Back. And this cover photo was used. Dating is the only thing you can put 10,000 hours into and end up right where you started. And it was a quote from this woman, Katie Kirsch, who's 30 and runs a leadership coaching startup out of New York City, ramped down her search for a husband after many of the men she dated either seemed turned off by her ambition or weren't career-oriented enough for her. And obviously, Twitter loves to shit on dating, who's not dating, who should be dating, why aren't more people getting married, why aren't they having babies, oh my god, population decline, blah, 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 blah. And in America's Lost Generation, my upcoming book, pre-orders are available now, I talk about how broken the dating market has gotten, and we're now in a situation where, economically speaking, women and men are playing on an equal playing field, and this has really complicated dating. And this post from this quote reply from Claire Lehman was very interesting. She said, to be honest, I don't really understand why. Is it because there are now more educated women than men, and so there aren't enough eligible matches according to these women's standards to go around? And it's, yeah. We're in a juxtaposition of many situations with this where, yeah, highly accomplished women also want to be with a highly accomplished man. There are very few of those, and fewer now because women are are taking up more. They're getting more degrees. They're taking more jobs. They're taking up more space in society, and the number of men who are also doing that was always small and shrinking. Which means those women, in order to get a good man, would really need to date down. Not a read, but women tend not to date down. I've seen many examples of it, many of them quite successful and quite happy, wonderful people. But by and large, a highly driven, career-focused woman is going to want a man who is also that way. She either seemed turned off by her ambition or weren't career enough for her. This is an example. Not every woman all in it, but this is an example. And so that leaves the dating pool very, very small. There are also, a lot of people who are not very career-oriented or very ambitious. I've been in that situation myself. I run 2 businesses. I have worked for myself most of my adult life. I'm a very driven person. I get a lot of stuff done. If anything, it's hard for me to slow down. Um, but this is a a very difficult thing. And the article, I'm not going to get into it. You can go read it if you want to, but the article basically goes on to say, like, we feel like men have left the dating pool. There's nothing left. There's no good men left, sort of thing. And and men are fleeing away from intimacy and relationships because they just can't hack it with with women who are on an equal footing, who have their own money, have their own car, have their own place, and don't quote unquote need a man to do anything. Um, and I there's there's an interesting thing with dating, I find, where when what women are looking for in a man and what men are looking for in women are very, very different things. And I think one of the struggles a really accomplished woman has is that for her, she looks at her accomplishments and says, doesn't this make me attractive? And the reality is, a woman being highly accomplished usually isn't a huge mover for a man. He's looking for other things. He's looking for, do you have your life together? Are you a clean person? Will you be a good mother for children? Do you want to stay home and raise children? Can I start a family with you? All this sort of thing. That's the stuff men tend to look for a lot more. Physical attractiveness is obviously a big mover. Um, Good personality. Do I feel, do you annoy me too much? All of those things are a huge factor um, in the in what men are looking for in women. And that, I think, that divergence of who's looking for what, because women, conversely, women are oftentimes looking for a man who is safe, is good, not a creeper, lets her be herself and express herself without being threatened by this, all these different things. These end up being kind of very divergent things. And then on the other side, you also get the situation where men really don't do well alone and single. Women tend to thrive more in those environments, mostly due to women having better and deeper social networks than men do. And so you have this kind of really big divergence. There's also political divergence. That's another story. You have these big divergences in what is being looked for, and I think part of the problem is women think women have an idea of what they think men will find attractive, and they don't necessarily understand what actually is a mover for a man. I also think the taxi analogy applies. Um, uh, one of the best analogies that I ever heard about dating was that men were like, how do I get him to marry me? And she's like, you don't. When a man's ready to get married, he puts his little taxi light on, looking for a wife, looking to get married. Until he puts the light on, there's no point. He's not ready yet. So really, don't look for just any man. Look for a man with his light on who's looking to get married. Like, that is, that's that taxi analogy of, wait till he puts on his light and pulls out from the taxi and starts driving around. Then you flag him down, and you'll find a man who's ready to get married and start a family, all this sort of thing. And I think that also applies in terms of, there's this economic changes, which makes it hard for men to feel like they can, attract a woman who is, making more money, whatever have you. But I also feel like, especially for the one who's 30, she's probably not the stage where the men are ready to get married yet, which is also a problem and a factor, especially if you want to have, kids younger and all this sort of thing. And so I think we have these, again, really divergent standards in what people are looking for and what they think will work in a dating market, and it makes things incredibly difficult. But I think the headline has in all the stuff I've read about this over the weekend, the headline always stands out to me: men, where have you gone? Please come back. I don't think men ever went anywhere. I think there's a lot of guys who've been left behind. And I guarantee you, if these women looked around and were willing to date the plumber, the drywaller, the trash man, they'd find great quality, wonderful men, decent fathers, and all this type of thing. But his job's probably not going to be terribly glamorous. He'll probably make as much money as you do, especially the trash man. He might make a nice salary, but you might make more money than him. But the reality is, how much money you make and how much you accomplish in your career is not going to be what he finds attractive about you. And that, I think, is the factor. So I would encourage women to embrace their wonderful femininity. I think one of the things broken with society is we do not have healthy expressions of masculinity and femininity going on. Um, Now we're getting very philosophical. But I would encourage to embrace femininity, express that in your fullness, loudest roar, because being in that space is incredibly beguiling. And so I just wanted to get in on this discourse a little bit because it's been going around, and I talk about dating in America's Lost Generation a lot and how the dating apps, and changes in the economy have changed datings for millennials and Gen Z. And so I thought it was kind of worth talking about. And also to remind you, pre-orders for America's Lost Generation are out now at CameronJournal.com. Click on Shop Cameron's Books, and you can pre-order. It'll be out by the end of the summer, if not sooner, because the typesetting is already done. So, that's it for me. Thank you so much for stopping by, to the Cameron Joel News Hour. Don't forget, on Wednesday, we're doing our very special event. And with the Living Joke podcast pilot. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter and for Cameron Joel Plus. Feel free to follow me on social media. I post exciting threads covering day-to-day news topics on all your favorite platforms, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook. So make sure to follow me there. All the links are at CameronJoel.com. It's at Cameron Cowan on Twitter and Instagram. It's at Cameron Journal on TikTok and Cameron L. Cowan on Facebook. So make sure to follow me there. I will see you on Wednesday for our special morning zoo style podcast. Sign up for the newsletter so you get the Saturday version. And I will see you all next Wednesday first and next Monday for the Cameron Joel News Hour. Thank you so much. Have a great night. Bye-bye.